to the All in Skills podcast. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by a friend of the pod, Navit Shchigel. Navit, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm pretty cold today here in Melbourne. It was
Okay.
freezing cold, and you're not here. You're not in Melbourne. Where are you?
Well, I'm in Perth, which is not freezing cold, so
Well, there you go, sunny Perth.
floating.
You don't sound like a Perth person, though. Where's your accent from?
So all my friends think I sound Australian now, my New Zealand friends, but obviously the Australians don't agree. I'm from New Zealand. Yeah.
Okay. And
Grew up in Wellington.
have you been in Perth for a long time?
I've been here for 22 years now, so yes,
A
it is a long
lifetime.
time. Yeah, a lifetime.
And
Yeah.
Navit, tell me, what is it that you do?
Well, I have my finger in a few pies at the moment. I'm an EALD specialist, so for people who don't know that, English is an additional language or dialect specialist, and I do some ed tech work related to that. I do some sessional lecturing at a university here. I do a little bit of teaching in high schools, around and about a bit. I left my role as a principal 3 years ago, and I've been pottering around in various roles since then, all of which I enjoy and all of which challenge me in different ways.
So is your background in education? Did you study education?
I did a degree in, I did a Bachelor of Arts, which is, what we did when we didn't know what we wanted to do. And I did it in politics and religious studies, which I found really, really interesting, but obviously not dinner party material. And I then worked at HP for a while, Hewlett Packard as it was known then, and a few other places. And when I found myself with 2 children living in Perth, and not quite knowing what I wanted to do career-wise. And I sort of had an epiphany in the middle of the night and decided that I wanted to train as a teacher. And I did the 1-year grad dip as it was back then. I actually think they've gone back to the grad dip, but they were Masters of Education for a while. And I've been a teacher ever since. So
Just out of
that
interest,
was, yeah.
I do want to hear about the teaching career. Just
Yeah.
out of interest, do you have any idea of your graduating class in arts? Have you got any idea where people ended up?
No idea at all. I don't know what people are doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it remains a popular degree, but it is
Yes.
very interesting to hear the directions people take an arts degree and where they go with that.
I think, I know that being a politics graduate, I was offered quite an exciting job actually at the time in working for a political party. And I turned it down because I had a young child and I was pregnant with another, and it was just too many hours a week for me. But I guess there must have been other people who didn't have children who could have taken that on and, worked the 80-hour week sort of thing until they climbed the ladder.
And let me just ask another question, because it has come up, and I'm almost ashamed to say with female guests rather than male guests, but that question of balancing having children and pursuing a career, how much of a challenge was that for you?
It's always been a challenge, and I think it is a challenge for most women, and I do think it's more of a challenge for most women than it is for most men. I mean, obviously there's exceptions to that rule always, but yeah, I mean, personally I felt a great need to be the primary carer for my children. That didn't mean I didn't work. I did work, but I wanted to be around enough to be their primary influence, I guess. And so, it was a constant balancing act, as it is for many mums out there.
I was reflecting the other day. I mean, I'm like you, I was born in the 70s. And I think when I was at school, a majority of my friends had a working father and a stay-at-home mother. That was still, it was changing, but it was still a majority. Was that your experience in New Zealand?
Yes, but my mother actually worked full-time. And it was unusual. It was considered very unusual. And she was judged quite harshly about it, actually, in New Zealand back in those days. I mean, she did it for the money, not for the love of a career. We were immigrants to New Zealand, and so, reality was a reality, and she worked. But yeah, it was a different world, and mothers were very much expected to stay at home and maybe volunteer for the school canteen and the parent club or whatever.
But you had an epiphany already with 2 children in tow.
Yes.
And that was education.
Yeah. So I had developed an interest in education after having my own children. And I literally sat up in the middle of the night and thought, why don't I do teaching? And I did. I'd missed the deadline for enrolling at uni, which was my habit really, because it was the same for my first degree. But I called the university and I was like, is there any space left? And both fortunately and unfortunately, it's not that hard to get into teaching. So there was space left and I got in.
Huh?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. And this what, it wasn't a master's at the time; it was a diploma.
Graduate
Graduate,
diploma.
graduate diploma. How was that? I mean, that experience, was it good?
I didn't really enjoy the study, to be perfectly honest. I really loved my Bachelor of Arts. I found it interesting and absorbing, and I loved the assignments I did. I did not feel the same way about my grad dip in education, but I loved prac. And so I knew I was on the right track, and I knew I just had to get through the kind of, certificate at the end of the course, because I really, really enjoyed my first, second, and my final pracs. And so I
Did
knew
you
I
have,
was doing the
at
right
what
thing.
point did you have to make the decision about the age group that you were focusing on, that you wanted to teach?
It was never a question for me. Primary school was just not something I was ever interested in. So it was secondary automatically. I didn't have any interest in primary school. I had previously worked as an untrained teacher's assistant, I guess you could call it, in an early education setting in New Zealand. And I did that for 2 years and I enjoyed aspects of it, but I knew that young children were just not my thing. And I did it while my own child was young. So it was interesting and it was really, really useful for me. Yeah.
And so you did your pracs in high schools.
Yeah. Yeah. And I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And so out of your graduate diploma, what sort of work did you walk into?
Well, like many, I was offered a job in my final prac. So I stayed on at the school there, and that was what they used to call a hard to staff school. It was a little bit of I wouldn't say a culture shock, because my own school experience was quite similar actually, but it wasn't an easy first gig. I was first of all told that I was going to be a literacy teacher, and I was trained as a society and environment, as it was known back then, social studies, HAS, whatever you want to call it, teacher. So my understanding of early literacy was zero. Not zero. I had my own children. That's what I knew.
And you can read. So there you go.
And I could read. And I learned to read at some point in my life. So that was interesting. And the other thing was that they put me in what they called back then the Step Up program, which was a group of about 10 year 9 boys who were moved out of mainstream classrooms due to their behaviour. And we were put in a prefab at the back of the school. And I was told that if I stopped them from killing each other, I've done my job. And I did. I stopped them from killing each other. So it was very good. But I, again, was quite ill prepared for that. And looking back, I realised that I probably didn't provide the best educational experience for them, although we all got along really well and they were quite lovely.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, they were very, very sweet to me, but I probably didn't extend them academically as much as I could have.
Year 9 in Australia, don't know that it's a bit of a neither fish nor fowl kind of a year, though.
Yeah,
It's not the start of high school. You haven't started on your matriculation
that's
work.
right. Yeah, it's that in between phase. And, cohort can vary between being quite immature to being quite mature in terms of their mental and physical development. So it's a bit of
But
a mixed bag,
none of that group left in a box, so that was a success.
And like I say, actually, we all got along really well. Like, they were lovely. We had a nice, cohesive, calm environment, but I don't think any of them were extended academically.
How long did you stay in this hard to staff school?
Well, I stayed there on and off because I ended up having another child. So I kind of stayed there on and off for a couple of years. And then I decided that I was coming home quite exhausted and I should probably just step out of teaching for a little bit while I had a toddler. And I did. I stepped out of teaching. I went into an admin role in a not-for-profit, and then I came back to teaching after like 2 years there. And I was very happy to do so. I like teaching. I just, when you've got a toddler at home, it's a bit exhausting when you come home after that kind of day.
Okay. Just another question. I'm assuming, again, what age were you when you did the graduate diploma?
So I was 34. I was a mature student.
And Does that make it more appealing for schools to take you on?
I don't know. I think it really is the performance and prac that does it. I've never really known a school to look that closely at your academic transcript. There may be some. I mean, maybe some of the schools that pride themselves on top academics would do so, but I think most schools are very concerned about how you manage a classroom and how prepared you are, and how much learning is going on in that classroom. And if you have done well in your pracs, then you're probably likely to do well as a teacher. And if you've enjoyed it, and got along with your mentor teacher and all the other teachers in the department, then it's a good sign, I guess.
Okay. So now 3 kids in tow.
Now 3 kids in tow.
Where'd you turn?
So I went back into teaching, and I went to a care school, which in other states is known as a special assistance school. And special assistance schools are designed for young people who've dropped out of mainstream education, and there can be a variety of reasons for that. Often it's educational challenges, so there might be some special educational needs there, something like dyslexia, dyspraxia, or the other some things, or it could be mental health challenges that young people face. Increasingly, it tends to be neurodivergence that kind of feeds into care schools or special assistance schools. And it's an interesting dynamic because you can have both the young people that were removed from mainstream education because they were difficult in their behaviour or considered to be difficult, and the young people who were impacted by that, the young people with neurodivergence who found mainstream education to be too chaotic. So you often have both ends of that spectrum in a special assistance school. But I was immersed in a part-time role, and it was what was known as an integration role. So my job was to go around young people's houses and try to convince them to come back into school. And I was pretty successful at that, actually. I did get them back into the care school. And the role of the care school is to try to either give young people an opportunity for post-secondary education or career, or to reintegrate them into mainstream schools. So that's kind of the...
How much of a role in those schools do the parents or the lack of parents play? I'm just curious. I've no idea, without any preconceived ideas.
It really varies a lot. Back then, there was almost no parent involvement at all. And that did play a role, definitely, because a lot of the young people that came to us were completely disengaged from education. Many hadn't been at school at all for even one day in 2 years or more. So I had students, say, in year 9 who hadn't been to school since year 6. That is changing, I think, over time. More young people are going into care schools or special assistance schools who do have quite involved parents and have been at school, but school just hasn't suited their needs. And that, I guess any educator, if they're being honest, will say parental involvement isn't always wonderful. Yeah.
I'm curious because the feeling I get, my children have now finished school.
Yeah, same. Yay!
They were educated in different countries, so it's interesting to contrast the experience we had raising them in Brazil and the experience in Australia too. It seems like a lot of parents in both countries, there's a feeling like the school kind of has to do everything. Like,
that's a huge problem.
I give you the boy, hand me the man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that the case?
I feel like it is. And that's a controversial statement, but I definitely feel that is the case. I feel that schools are lumped more and more with actually bringing up young people rather than educating them. And I think there's a few problems with that. One is obviously that, as a teacher, I'm not the parent. And I don't want to be either, actually. And while I think that it's lovely to have a holistic education which values the well-being of the young person, it's not helpful for a parent to outsource parenting to professionals. Parenting's different. Professionals are ideally unemotional and very well regulated in the workplace, and parents can be more emotional, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Yeah, I think it's good for young people to to have real, raw conversations and emotions with people who are emotionally and very obviously emotionally invested in them. And they're just not going to get that with professionals. It just doesn't work that way.
I read another interesting statistic about Australian education the other day, and that is that we have a high percentage of students at private, independent, and Catholic schools. Much higher, say, for example, than the UK. The number, I think, in the UK is about 7%.
Yeah.
In this country, it's 40,
It's
40
very
plays.
high. It's about 40, yeah.
It's very high, and it's growing. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not diminishing.
Yeah.
And I contrast that. My children were state educated. I remember years ago reading the article talking about, I don't know if it's causation or correlation, but if you want to know what are the chances of your child doing well at school, you look at the number of books on a shelf in
Right. Yeah.
the parent's house. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
a thing, but yeah, I just wonder about this attitude that parents have towards education and the role of the teacher, the role of the school, and how involved the parent can or should be in that.
Well, I think increasingly the reason that parents send their children to non-government schools is because they know that non-government schools have the freedom to expel students who are problematic. And they know that if they send their children to the local government school, they may very well be stuck, for want of a better word, with some very problematic behaviour in their classroom for their entire schooling. And it is a problem. I mean, there's no doubt that can, if you have a school where there is quite a lot of behaviour support needed, then learning will take place in the classroom. There's just no doubt about it. If it takes this teacher 15 minutes to settle everyone down and only half the kids have brought a pen to school and the teacher's running around trying to get spare pens and bits of paper and, it's just not going to have the same educational experience as somebody who goes to a school where you come into class, the students are all sitting down ready and waiting to learn. It's just not the same. So that's not always public versus private because, there are public schools that have a very invested parent body who are invested in the education of their students, of their children, and don't require the school to be the parent. But in some areas, that's a real challenge for parents. And so they choose the private school in the area. And, I guess that's all assisted by government policies, which allow low fee paying private Catholic schools to exist or independent Catholic schools to exist, which in some countries just doesn't exist because they don't get any government funding. So there have definitely been government policies that have, I guess, encouraged that or allowed that at least.
Have you taught in both sectors?
Yes, I have. Yeah. Yeah, but there's a big, I won't say a big but. There's a but there because the independent schools that I've taught in are special assistance schools, not the kind of high academic achieving schools.
Posh hockey sticks sort of a place.
Not posh places, not posh. And so I'm a bit conflicted about this whole thing because I feel that the value brought by some independent schools, especially like special assistance schools or some of the Catholic schools that might be the only school in a region or remote area, is really valuable. For there to be a choice for parents is a really valuable thing. I'm a bit conflicted about the whole thing because I do feel like excellent educational opportunities should be available to everybody. And maybe independent school, the kind of situation we have in Australia doesn't allow that. But on the other hand, the other option is only to have public schools, and that doesn't provide that either. So, yeah, it's a tough one.
Tough nut to crack.
It's a tough one, yeah. Don't have an answer.
Okay, well, that's okay. So returning then to your career, what was the next? What was the next?
So, look, I stayed in the care school system, really, and I stopped being an integration teacher in that first school. I became a teacher, a classroom teacher there. I started to work full time there. I transferred to a different school, and then I became a deputy principal in that school. And after that, I became a founding principal of a new care school that had opened up in Perth. I was there for a couple of years, and then I left.
The difference in your experience as a deputy principal and a principal, are they markedly different sorts of experiences?
Markedly different, yes. I feel like a principal is responsible for absolutely everything that ever happens in the whole world. It's a very high responsibility job. And in a small school, it can be quite lonely because you don't have that leadership team around you. Absolutely all the responsibility not only comes back to you, which I think is in every school for the principal, but you're not even supported in some of the decisions that you're making. You just have to kind of make them all by yourself. And it can be quite stressful in that way. I found being a deputy principal actually quite enjoyable, but I didn't feel the same in every aspect of. I liked certain things about being a principal. Like I liked being able to make decisions. I liked being able to decide the direction of the school, which I think is quite exciting. You know, there is a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of politics, obviously, always. A lot of stakeholder management. You know, you have boards and, you know, communities and local members of parliament, all sorts of things that you juggle. In a care school, there's the added responsibility of well-being, which can be quite burdensome. You know, there are times when, I mean, you know, you have a student body that have mental health challenges, which may include suicide attempts, lots of things going on at home, sexual abuse and other forms of abuse. And it pretty much falls on the principal in that environment to do something about it, especially when the school was small. And I had no deputy, so it was just me. And I mean, I had an outsourced psychologist, and that was it really. When it came to wellbeing, so there was quite a lot of pressure there, and you know, there were some hairy moments.
Sounds like a slightly friendless experience. Was that the case?
I think, I mean, look, I felt I work very collaboratively. That's my nature. So, you know, I had kind of, I guess, friends and allies, but they couldn't take on the role. They couldn't take on the responsibility. They couldn't even take a part of it because that just wasn't their job. And so not so friendless, but lonely in terms of responsibility. Yeah. Yeah. I think a principal needs a deputy, at least one.
But do you think that maybe had a lot to do with the nature of the role of principal that you had in that specific place, or?
Absolutely, yes. And I think there are principals that are surrounded by leadership teams, and I think that's a much better experience. And when I think of when I was a deputy, my principal had me and another deputy involved in that leadership team, and I think that provided him with a lot of support, and I'm sure he would say so. And I know that he often consulted with us, and even though he was ultimately responsible, he did consult and he did lean on us for our ideas and our input and our actual work in space. So I do think that is, yeah, that's very much dependent on the school.
Okay. So after leaving that principal role, EAL, is that?
Yeah, English is an additional language or dialect.
Yes, but how did you make that decision?
Well, I fell into it, actually. I kind of got offered a job in it, and it was actually an adult ESL, as they call it. I did that for a while I thought it was while I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do. But I ended up staying with that, and I did some further training in it, and yeah, I just ended up becoming that, you know, sort of that became my thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I still, you know, it's funny because I mean, humanities was my major. I actually did TESOL as my minor, and so I had some understanding of it, but I hadn't worked in it until I left schools. Yeah, I like it.
Great,
it's enjoyable.
Very nice. You got 3 kids. Any of them going into education?
No, and I'm quite happy about that. I think teaching's it's a profession that is very valuable and very undervalued. And I probably felt that most strongly actually during COVID, when I felt that the government was treating teachers as babysitters and very unconcerned for the health of teachers. Everyone else had to stay home just in case they got sick. And health staff, obviously, were out in the workplace, but they were given protective gear, and teachers were just sort of shoved in a classroom with sneezing children and told to get on with it. And I thought that was a bit rude. And I just felt really undervalued. I felt quite angry about it at the time. I mean, looking back, you know, the hysteria over COVID probably wasn't as justified as I thought it was at the time. But at the time, you know, we were all scared. And yeah, I felt like it was a bit of a kick in the gut, really. We kept being told, well, we have to keep you open because important people have to go to work and their children have to go somewhere. And I felt that was just not very nice. So that's probably when I started to feel undervalued in education. Before that, I'd always felt like the profession of teacher was so noble and maybe other people could see that too. But then I realized that other people weren't seeing that in the same way that I was.
If a young person listening to this is undertaking their teaching degree now, what
Yes.
advice would you give them?
I think they have to decide what they want. Are you the kind of person that wants to work with young people who have maybe challenges? And that's very rewarding work, but also very hard work. Or are you the kind of person that would rather work in an academic environment? Is that where you want to be? Because I find that in education you become pigeonholed and it's very difficult to transfer from one to the other. So I think that's something that I would encourage young people studying teaching to really think about before they accept their first job.
And one last question, because I think it came up in our last conversation. I thought it was quite interesting. That is the question of burnout.
Yes.
Burnout, I think in many professions is a thing. I'm sure it's very
Yeah.
real in teaching.
Yeah.
How can a teacher prepare for that? How can a teacher plan, if you like, for either avoiding it or mitigating that?
Well, I wish I had all the answers for that, actually. I think part of it is what I just said. Choose the role that you want. Like, be very aware of where you want to be in education. I think having a clear picture about what it is that you want to achieve. While I think that some people thrive being in the classroom for their entire teaching career, I know that for many people that's just too much. So looking for a role with a lighter teaching load and a heavier administration load after you're an experienced teacher, obviously, can help as well. So if you are, if you're in a school where, I don't know, there's a need for student services, or there's a need for vocational education, or there's a need for extended academic or something like that, train yourself up, make yourself available for the one that suits you and go for it, because that slight reduction in teaching load, or maybe the reduction in class size, can be be something that helps you when it comes to burnout. Having, 50 years of teaching 30 students from year 7 to 12, most people don't quite manage that. Yes.
Navit Shchigel, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thanks.